story is unique because she was with her mother the entire time. Both women survived, and I think it was because they were together. I'm telling you the story today of what they went through while they were together, and it's the story of their family, of my family. Throughout this presentation, you'll see clips of my grandma telling her testimony to two different sources in two different video formats. She gave her testimony to two different organizations, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in 1990 and the USC Shoah Foundation in 1996. Ruth's mom, my great-grandma, was named Hanna. She was born in Poland in 1900, but moved to Germany as a teenager in 1917 for the chance at a better life. At that time, Germany had the reputation of being a place with greater tolerance and more opportunity for Jews. There she met her husband Yitzhak, Ruth's father. They married in 1927 in Frankfurt. He traced his family lineage many generations back in Frankfurt. My grandma was born in 1929, and her younger brother Zev was born in 1933. As you may know, the world economy crashed in 29 and Hitler rose to power in 33, the year Zev was born. They were children in Nazi Germany, and it was a very scary time. These are pictures of Zev and Ruth before the war. These were taken around 1933 in Frankfurt. Here are my great-grandparents, also before the war, around 1927 when they got married, again in Frankfurt. Eventually, lots of restrictions were put on Jews, including the requirement to wear the yellow Star of David. This photo shows my grandma at 13 years old wearing the yellow star with the word Jew in German on it. This photo was taken by the state secret police, the Gestapo, on April 1st, 1941. This was 3 weeks before the family was sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. My grandma had a childhood best friend named Irma Stern. Next, you'll see a clip in which you'll hear my grandma talk about Irma. You'll hear how they met. You'll hear also about Irma's fate. While you hear and see my grandmother's video, you'll also see a photo of Irma with her mom. My grandmother mentions the word Shema. This is one of the most important and well-known Jewish prayers.
Well, let me tell you how I met Irma first. Very early on, like about 1934, so Jewish people did not want their children not to play with non-Jews because it was dangerous. Children will play and fight over a toy or something, and then a half hour later they're best of friends again. Grown-ups, when grown-ups mix in, very bad results could follow. At the time, people were denounced and taken away or punished. And so one day I was sitting outside of our apartment house downstairs, and a little girl came up to me and said that she wanted to play with me. Could she play with me? And I said, oh, I can't play with you. And she said, why? And I said, well, my parents told me that I cannot play with non-Jewish children. And she said, but I'm Jewish. And I looked at her and I said, no, you can't be Jewish. To me, it just seemed that she wasn't Jewish. Or I was trying to show how wonderfully I obeyed my parents' orders. And she told me that she was Jewish, and I insisted that she wasn't. And finally, she started saying, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, and I knew that she was my friend forever, that she was Jewish. We remained friends until we went to school. It so happened we went to the same classes. She was half a year older than I, and I saw her for the last time when taken away, supposedly to be taken on a transport to be resettled in the East, in Poland somewhere, we were told. Her parents had chopped off her braids because they said it would be more sanitary for her to have short hair than long hair. And I saw her from our apartment window, and she walked by in a little group, very forlorn, very sad, very horrible, and I remember the sight to this day.
Today, there is a Holocaust memorial in Frankfurt containing little plaques of the names of all the Jewish victims who were from there. These are the images of that Holocaust memorial, including the little stone that bears Irma's name. The date and location of death are listed as unknown. 1 year after Irma's family was taken away, my grandma's family was called for supposed resettlement in the East. They were sent from Frankfurt to Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland on April 19, 1943. Next, you'll hear my grandma describe what conditions were like in the camp. She describes what happened when they first arrived. Ruth and Hannah were admitted into the women's camp. They were tattooed, given prisoner numbers, and shaved. Their possessions were taken away. They were given prisoner clothing. Ruth describes the intense labor and the minuscule amounts of food. While my grandma speaks, you'll also see a photo of her tattoo.
The first day we arrived, our hair was shaved, and we were standing completely in the nude, and I was frightened. I was 13 years old. I called my mother, and she answered me, and I turned around to look for her, but I didn't recognize her because, of course, she had no hair. It was impossible to recognize her totally without clothes and without hair. And then we were tattooed, and of course was nothing like the disinfectant or anything put on the needles. Everybody's tattoo became slightly infected, but that stopped, and we were brought into barracks, at first into the A camp and then later on into the B camp. One of our first chores was the roads in Auschwitz were terrible. They were muddy. And when the mud dried, it was full of ruts. So they had this big steamroller, but it wasn't propelled by steam. It was pushed by prisoners. It was tremendous. And they filled it up with sand. We had to fill it with sand so it would be heavy, and then someone had to go out and push it to even the road. So one of our first jobs was to fill this steamroller, and then later on to push it across the ruts to try and even out the road. I don't think it was very successful. And one of our next jobs was to dig out wherever the road was higher and to fill in where the road was lower. It really didn't make any sense because we dug parts of the road up and filled in another hole, and it seemed like this kind of work was designed to take our energy away and to make us weak. And I think that was the purpose, to demoralize us and to sap our strength. We had this horrible food where we had I don't know, a few times a week, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, we had a slice of salami, which was about 1 inch thick. Sometimes it was liverwurst, and something that came out of rusty barrels that was called tea. And sometimes they had soup. They made soup out of some kind of turnips that weren't even peeled, and potato peels, and where the sand wasn't washed off, and they just threw everything together. And that was the food that we had. And it must have been just a few hundred calories a day because everybody was getting sick. One of the signs of malnutrition and vitamin deficiency are sores. And people had terrible sores which festered on their legs. It was just awful. And that was one of the things that you could be taken to the crematorium for.
Because of malnutrition, filth, lack of sanitation, lack of medical care, diseases were widespread in the concentration camps. Prisoners died of all sorts of diseases, such as typhus, malaria, dysentery, among others. There were also 8 gas chambers in Birkenau, where people were murdered with poison gas, and then their bodies were cremated. Sometimes the specially chosen Nazi troops called the SS, who were in charge, would perform selections from among the prisoners, selecting some to go to the gas chambers while keeping others alive to work in the camp for a bit longer. My grandma came down with the disease typhus. After barely recovering from it, she was selected to go to the gas chamber. Next, you'll hear Ruth describe how she survived typhus and how she was pulled out of the group that was going to their death that day. In this clip, she refers to the girl who ran the barracks. She's making mention of the role of block leader, which was the Jewish prisoners put in charge by the SS over other prisoners.
When I got sick, I had typhus. My mother would sit at my bed at the cot. She had nothing to give me. All she could do was stroke my hand and hold my hand. But to me, and I had lost, I was most of the time unconscious. I didn't even know, I was comatose. But the few moments, the lucid moments that I have, I remember that I was sitting there looking at my mother and thinking that I cannot die. I cannot do this to my mother. She'd lost her home. She'd lost all her anchor. I didn't know if my father would survive. I didn't know what the lot be for my brother. And I could not add to her woe by dying. And I think that is something that got me through. I'm not sure. I really looked terrible. So there was a selection to the gas chambers one morning, and my mother and I were out there. And the SS man saw my condition and pushed and told me, moved me one way. And my mother realized that I was going to the gas chamber. She started pleading with him that he shouldn't take away her child and please let her live and all this. So, and he said to her, well, if you love your child so much and you want to be with her, go with her. And just at that point, the girl that managed the barracks came out, and I don't know where she came from actually. She came out and she grabbed me under the arm, took my mother on the other side, and they walked me back to the barracks. I was amazed that this SS man didn't see me, didn't see us do this. I mean, we could have all been shot on the spot. And that is how I managed to survive.
As you heard, my grandmother's connection with her mother played a role in her survival. There is a well-known book by the author who is a survivor, Viktor Frankl, called Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl, while in the camps, felt that it was a common emotional occurrence to feel that if a prisoner felt that his or her life had a purpose, then they somehow found that little bit extra of effort to try to stay alive 1 hour longer, 1 day longer. Frankl's purpose was to finish writing a manuscript and to live to see his wife again. I can't help but to think that my grandmother's purpose was to survive for her mother's sake, and that Hannah's purpose was to survive to take care of Ruth, and that is how they got through it together. Although Ruth was Hannah's only daughter, many other women in the barracks turned to Hannah for motherly love and support. Next, you'll hear Ruth talk about how her mom was like the mother to many women who had been torn from their families. During the clip, you'll see a photo of Hannah that was taken after the war.
My mother became well known. Everybody called her Mutti. Mutti is a German way of calling mommy, and I called her Mutti, so everybody else called her Mutti. The women were lost. They had lost all their homes and their parents, and they didn't know what had happened to their mothers and their fathers and their relatives. So they sort of adopted my mother, and she was affectionately known as Mutti, and everybody came crying on her shoulders. I mean, she cheered them up as much as she could. Things will get better, we'll get out of here. The big pastime in Auschwitz was to talk about food. I guess when you're starving, talk about all these wonderful things: chicken soup, gefilte fish, stuffed chicken, this and that. And we were talking about the recipes we would use and the menus we would create once we were out. And when my mother wanted to give them hope that they would survive, she would talk about the good food that they would be able to cook once they would be out of liberty. But you see, you could talk about the food, but if you didn't have it, you died. People died, people got sick, they died of starvation, they died of beatings, they died of the filth, from the malnutrition.
I mentioned before that this is a story of the family, so you might be wondering what happened to Ruth's brother and her father. Her brother, Zev, remained with Ruth and Hannah temporarily in the women's camp, but ultimately they were separated and he was sent to the children's camp and then to other camps. Zev survived. Their father did not survive. We know now from Nazi records that Yitzhak died in Auschwitz-Birkenau on November 19, 1943. Ruth and Mutti had last seen him 6 months before that when they were separated at the train station in Frankfurt. Next, you'll hear Ruth talk about what happened Christmas Day, 1943, when she and other women could see men from the men's camp being taken by truck to the crematorium, to the gas chamber and crematorium. She believed her father was among the men that day. She mentions the song Hatikva. Hatikva means hope. It is a song about the Jewish people's yearning for a homeland of their own. She also uses the word Kaddish, which is a Jewish prayer said in memory of a lost person. We now know that the events that Ruth describes on this Christmas day happened just 1 month after her father's recorded death.
We heard the familiar noise of 4 or 5 trucks with men from Auschwitz being driven to the crematorium. The road was between the men's camp and the women's camp, and the crematorium was at the other end, and these trucks now were being driven, and of course we knew there was no going to be a miracle that day. In back of the truck was that little Jeep-like wagon that the Germans drove. There was a red cross painted on top and on the side, so if an airplane would fly over, a so-called enemy airplane, they would think it was a mission of mercy. Of course, it contained the gas, the canisters of the blue gas, the pellets that made up the prussic acid gas. So this wagon was following it, and as the first truck with the people in an open truck approached the site of the chimneys, they started singing Hatikva. And then the second truck picked this up, the third truck picked it up, and then to the end, I don't know if it was 4 or 5 trucks. And as they came into the compound of the crematorium, of course the singing stopped, one truck after another. And that night my mother dreamt that my father told her that she should now say Kaddish for him, and we have established that day as the day that my father died. But we then felt that this was the day he died, and we kept that day in memory.
The Jewish prisoners sang Hatikva, hope, when they knew they were about to be killed. The Nazis could break their bodies and take their lives, but they could not destroy their souls. This is an example of spiritual resistance. Usually when people hear about resistance, they think of armed resistance or fighting back with weapons. While this did occur in many instances, you should also know that there's other kinds of resistances. One type is spiritual, when people do things to preserve their humanity, even in the most inhumane conditions. Next, you'll hear Ruth talk about a friend she made in Birkenau, Nini Ben Mayor. Nini was from Salonika, Greece. While you hear Ruth talk about her, think of the ways that the girls maintained their sense of self and their dignity against Nazi brutality.
So I made friends with Nini Ben Mayor. she was studying to be an opera singer, and to us at the time when she sang, it was like the most beautiful thing you could ever hear. And maybe she had a beautiful voice, and to me it now sounds like it was like an angel singing. And of course, there were Jews from all over Europe, and every language was spoken in the camp except English. They didn't get as far as to the English Jews yet. They realized that everybody, in order to communicate, and luckily they didn't stop that, would speak within a language that she would know. Nini and I could communicate in English because I had studied English, and so did she. And that was the only language the two of us had in common. Of course, this was forbidden. So because it was forbidden, I mean, you're 13 years old, in spite of everything, you think you're very brave. So we were speaking English, and she told me then the story that she was trying to be an opera singer. And whenever there was a chance, Nini would sing for the prisoners. And of course, we had so few mental escapes, we had so few anything that was nice that was happening, that we begged her all the time whenever she was even halfway in the mood to sing for us. Well, her sister died in the summer, and after that, all the spirit went out of her. She just lost all hope, and of course she didn't sing anymore. This SS man Taube, he had heard that Nini had a wonderful voice, and he proposed that she live in his house, yes, and sing for him. And Nini knew what it meant, but you have to realize, for the time that she would have been alive, and of course you were hoping every day that maybe through some miracle there would be some kind of release. But for the time that she might have stalled and would have been alive, she might have lived in clean sheets and would have had a bath and would have had fairly decent food. And so the sacrifice that she made was tremendous. She refused him, and among the next selections to the gas chamber, her number was prominently mentioned, and there was no way that anyone could have erased the number. I mean, he made sure that she was on that next transport to the gas chamber, and of course she was killed that way.
Nini refused to be subjected to whatever might have happened to her in Taube's home. We do not know what that situation might have been, and she really could not have known either, but she feared being raped or worse, even though sexual relations between Aryans and Jews were prohibited. Rather than risking it, Nini sacrificed her life by turning him down. She was 16 years old. These are photos that I took in Auschwitz-Birkenau in 2017 when I traveled to Poland. This is what the camp looks like today, but it can help you visualize where some of these events took place. This is barrack number 20 in the women's camp, the very barrack where Ruth, Hannah, and Nini were imprisoned. The picture on the left is the entry door on the outside, and the inside, picture on the right, shows the cots with wood planks where prisoners slept. Ruth and Hannah remained together in Auschwitz-Birkenau until November 1944. They were sent to a labor camp in Ravensbrück and its sub-camp Malchow after being in Auschwitz for about a year and a half. The conditions at first were slightly better. The prisoners were put to work making items that would be used for the German war effort. Next, you'll hear Ruth describe the work. While you listen, think again about how Ruth's actions demonstrate her spiritual resistance.
In this place, we worked in an ammunition factory. The ammunition factory was inside the woods. Every morning we were walked out. 1,000 of us went to work, walked into the woods, and overhead you could see camouflage netting where the woods were sparse, and you could see the birds and the squirrels and the rabbits. Very nice. We walked up to what looked like a mountain, a little hill, and you opened a door, and once you opened the door, you walked inside, and there was a factory. There, in this underground factory, and the whole woods there was honeycombed with this factory. We made bullets, but they were also made hand grenades in a different department. We sat at a table, and each end of the table was an SS woman and watched what we were doing. We were given a gray powder, and we were given something that looks like a hamburger press. It had 144 holes in it, and we were given 2 halves of a bullet. Each was put into one of the holes, then we filled it up with this gray powder, then we filled up the other half of this press. We filled it up with half of the bullet, then we turned it over, had to press down very hard, it had to fit precisely, and then we had 144 bullets. Well, the SS women were making sure that no one would do anything wrong there. So I had to do what I was told, but somehow I was able to, within a few millimeters, a millimeter or so, or maybe even less, I tried to push the bullet so that the top and the bottom would not match. I'm hoping that in this way I helped the Allied war effort. I don't know if I did or not, but that was my way of protesting, of sabotaging what the Germans were doing.
Sabotage was an offense punishable by death, so trying to misalign the bullets was very dangerous. Ruth and Hannah were in Ravensbrück for 7 months. Conditions were getting worse. The Nazis stopped giving the prisoners any food, so there was a food riot when they tried to break in to the food storage area. By the end of April 1945, the Soviet army was approaching, so the Nazis decided to empty the camp. Ruth and Hannah were sent out on a death march with other prisoners. After a week or so of marching, they were liberated. Ruth describes the liberation by saying that suddenly the Nazi guards tried to disappear into the crowds of prisoners, and suddenly the Americans and the Soviets were there. The Second World War in Europe came to an end on May 8th, 1945. Ruth was 15 years old. Ruth and Hannah were then taken to a displaced persons camp. Eventually, they had to decide where to go. Next, you'll hear Ruth describe what happened after the war.
They asked us where we wanted to go. Now, we had agreed with my father and everyone in the, my brother and my mother, that whoever would live would try to make his way back to Frankfurt, and so we could be united as a family and then see where we would go from there. We stayed around in Frankfurt, hoping, even though we knew better, that my father somehow would have made his way back. I wrote to Czechoslovakia, to his birthplace, thinking that maybe somehow he would have ended up there. Maybe he was sick, maybe he was somewhere in a hospital. But of course, all this hope disappeared soon. And the last day that our visa was to come to the United States was still good, was when we finally embarked and gave up all hope that my father was alive. But I still didn't give up hope. Even when I came here, I kept thinking, oh, well, maybe somewhere, somehow I will hear that he is someplace, but of course not.
My grandmother's father never returned, and that was by far the most painful thing for her to talk about. Ruth and Hannah left for the United States in 1947. They found out that Zev was alive and he was on his way to Palestine, which would become Israel. Hannah, my great-grandmother, never remarried. As it turned out, her first job in the United States was as a chef. Ruth was enrolled in high school in New Jersey. She met her husband, my grandpa Harry, and they married in 1948. Ruth was just 19 when she was married. My grandpa was an American Jew and had served in the US Army. He had been part of a well-known infantry led by Eisenhower that had liberated the concentration camp Ohrdruf. Ruth and Harry started a family business and had 3 sons. My dad, Mark, is their middle son. Eventually, Zev also came to the United States, in 1954. He married and had 2 children. These are some photos of the family that Ruth and Hannah built after the war. This is my grandparents' wedding. This is Ruth with Hannah with Ruth's oldest son, my Uncle Alan, in 1952. This is Zev's wedding in 1964. You can see in this picture Hannah, Zev, his bride Sylvia, Ruth, Harry, and the 3 boys of Ruth and Harry. This is me with my grandma at my bat mitzvah in 1999. Like I said, when I started talking to you, this is the story of the family. I've told you so far the experience that my grandmother underwent and what she went through with her mother and how they demonstrated many acts of resistance. To conclude, you'll hear my grandmother's message about why she told her story to so many people and what she would have wanted you to remember from hearing her story today.
I'm going through, it's now more than 40 years, I'm going through this in my mind over and over, and I'm trying to figure out why, how, inhumanity, and yet inhumanity like this does go on. Glad I can do something that will keep this in front of the public so that eventually people will know that it really happened. Perhaps it can be a warning to the people, to the world. It started with 6 million. It made it possible for the world to accept large number of killings. Large numbers are being killed, and today when large numbers of people are being killed, we talk about it, we cry about it, we forget about it. And I'm trying to do my thing to try to keep in mind how easy it is to fall into a police state, to become a police state, and to fall into this pattern of uncontrolled hatred and destruction. We're trying in our little way, I think all of us, all the survivors are trying in a little way to say, this is what happened, beware, don't fall into this sort of inhumanity.
We must learn from this history. It is now my responsibility and yours to make sure that inhumanity like this does not happen again. So keep your eyes open to injustice wherever you see it. Do something in your way to try to stop it. Resist actions that dehumanize others, because we never want genocide to occur again. Thank you.
Lauren?
Yes.
You have to remake me the host so that we can continue. Please.
Okay. I'm sorry, do you know where I do that?
Yes, no problem. So do you see where it says panelists?
Participants? No, I don't see panelists.
That's okay, let's see. Can you turn your video on? Okay, we see your screen.
Yeah, here's start video.
Oh, okay. There you are. Great. And then if you want to stop sharing, we can see just you, and then we can go into Q&A if you're all right with that.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Lauren, for being here tonight and sharing your grandmother's story and your presentation. We so greatly appreciate it. And we do have some questions. So if it's okay, we can just dive right into those.
Sure.
So the first question is, did your great uncle stay in Israel, and do you have family in Israel now?
He stayed in Israel only until 1954. He was in the army, and then he moved to New Jersey after that. I do have family in Israel. Some of my cousins have made Aliyah, but that was some of Alan's children, so not Zev's children.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is, what motivated you to participate in Heritage Testimonies?
Well, I think the importance of preserving this story has been my life's work to this point. So writing the biography has been a 10-year undertaking, and I saw the opportunity to create a video testimony which will one day be what's available for students in New York at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. So I thought that's for me when I saw that opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Our next question is, was your grandmother as open to telling these stories to your family as she was in formal interviews? And if so, how did she choose to share?
She was open to telling her story. I think she didn't talk about it very much in the 50s, 60s, 70s or so because life was busy. But as she was older and had grandchildren, she realized how important it was to be open and to share her stories. So I saw her very regularly. I could ask her anything I wanted. She toned it down as to not scare a child, but she wrote lots and lots of short stories, and she started an autobiography. So these documents that she left behind were invaluable to me and to my family. But it was difficult for her to tell her story. So I think when she would put herself in front of many audiences and groups, and it was hard for her. But I think she felt the importance of doing it anyway.
Thank you. One question from Facebook says, I know that after the war, many survivors tried to move on and rebuild their lives. Did your great-grandmother Hannah ever talk about her experiences with the family? Did she and Ruth ever confide in each other about shared horrors after the war, or is Ruth's testimony all the family has?
Unfortunately, my great-grandmother died when I was a baby, so I'm not sure how much she spoke about it. I don't think she spoke about it too much with her grandsons, with Ruth's sons or Zev's children, but she died before the Shoah Foundation and Holocaust Museum opened, so before these video testimonies were taken. What I do know is that she found a brother and sister after the war. And Ruth wrote about how they would stay up all night talking and reminiscing, and they would talk about the war together. So I think that there was some family discussion of it among the survivors in the family.
Thank you. Our next question says, how does your grandmother's experience and resilience help you in today's current worldwide predicament?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we're going through is difficult, but I think being the grandchild of a survivor makes me sort of understand that things could always be worse, and we have to keep our eyes open to assigning blame, and that we can get through anything. If my grandmother got through this, I can take anything, right? And so can everybody else. And I say that, not there are bad things that can happen, but resilience is important, and we have an incredible example in Ruth and in Hannah of heroism.
Thank you. How was your family able to learn the date of your great-grandfather's death?
We emailed the archives, the archivist at the Auschwitz-Birkenau museum. It's now a museum in Poland. The Nazis had kept very detailed records. There's not records of all prisoners, but of the records that they will respond to email 5, 6, 7 months after you request it. And so there was actually a death certificate created by the Nazis, falsified, of course, showing the date that Yitzhak was killed.
Thank you. Another question is, do you know if your parents have shared Ruth's story in a similar way that you're doing tonight? Maybe not on, Zoom or Facebook Live, but, sharing with an audience.
I'm mostly the family historian. My dad has talked about his mother's experience, but I know it inside out and backwards, I think, because I've been writing a book for many years. And so I've been the keeper of the memories so far. So I'm the most active in the family at preserving the story, I would say.
Yeah, and Lauren, that really goes into our next question, which is, can you tell us more about what it was like writing your grandmother's biography?
Sure. I decided to write it when I was on birthright in Israel, and we went to Yad Vashem, and that was in 2006. So it's taken quite a while because I published this year. I would write the book on weekends as a side thing all through college and grad school and working. So it was never a full-time effort, and that's why it was good almost to do it that way, because the material is very heavy. And so I would work on it and then put it down and then come back to it and then put it down. And it was a lot of transcribing videos and original documents, and then putting it into a series, chronological order, and a series of events. The book's written in the format of letters, so I worked on creating the letter concept for a while, and then had an editor work on the book with me for about 2 years until it was completed.
Wow. Thank you. That kind of goes into our next question, which is, you just said that it is written in letter format. How much of the writing is from her recorded testimony versus your memories and conversation?
It's mostly based on her sources.
Mm-hmm.
I had about 6 hours of video footage and short stories, hundreds of pages of short stories. And so that's what comprised the most of the book. There are bits and pieces that are based on my memory, but the majority is not my memory of it.
Thank you, Lauren. So our next question is, when did you know that you were a descendant of a Holocaust survivor?
Oh, I was very young when I realized. I'm not sure how I knew, I guess because of my grandma's tattoo, but she was open about it. So it was just something I sort of grew up knowing. It wasn't a secret.
And what would you suggest to any 2G or 3G that want to tell their family's story, but they don't have recorded testimony?
That's a great question. I would probably start by asking what sort of material they do have, whether they have anything written, what their memories are, how extensive it is, and see what they can do with that. I mean, a book is not the only option. There's so many ways that stories can be preserved. The 3G groups have a great program to train the descendants on how to tell their grandparents' story in a school setting. So that's one opportunity, but there's so many things out there, and I think every story deserves to be remembered. So I would encourage 2Gs and 3Gs to pursue that opportunity if they're interested in doing it.
Great, thank you. And how can a 2G or a 3G get involved?
There's a lot of ways. There are New York and New Jersey 2G and 3G groups we could find on Facebook, I'm sure. And there's an organization called the Blue Card, which raises money for destitute survivors. They have initiatives that I'm sure they have volunteers that could possibly help. So it depends really what they're looking to do, but I would suggest those areas.
Thanks for your suggestion, Lauren. Lauren, we talked about in your intro briefly how your grandmother shared her experiences to numerous audience and school groups. How have you shared your grandmother's story besides with us tonight and writing her biography? Have you spoken to school groups or other public forums before?
I've given the presentation in a few schools, yes, as a Hebrew school once and one or two other times. But I'm looking to hopefully continue to tell the story more.
I'm sure you will. If we can just keep going with that question, what were the students' reactions to your presentations?
Most of them were captivated for the whole presentation, which is good for middle school, high school age. I think they weren't really shocked so much. I think they had learned about the Holocaust and knew, but Ruth's story is very sad and it's very heavy, and I think they felt that, and they recognized that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that you are involved with certain organizations and you promote Holocaust education, of course, but can you go into a little more about how you raise funds for Holocaust survivors today?
Sure. That's with the Blue Card.
Okay.
The Blue Card's an organization that was actually founded in Nazi Germany during the war, before the war, and then became reestablished in the United States after the war. And their mission from the beginning was to help first the Jewish refugees and then the Jewish survivors. And now their mission is still to help Jewish survivors today in the New York area and around the world. So they have food, they give financial assistance, they give medical assistance, and or provide funds for that. So I'm active in their organization to fundraise for them.
Wow, thank you. As you know, sometimes speaking in front of a large audience or any audience can be, a little nerve-wracking. So what suggestions do you have for any 2G or 3G that are presenting for the first time?
Breathe. That's a good one. I think practice makes perfect. So the 3G groups that have the events where we practice in front of each other are good. And the Museum of Jewish Heritage has, which I created this program through, has the 6-month-long training program on giving the story. So if you do it enough, you get used to it. So just to practice before the first time around.
Definitely. Lauren, where can we access your publication, your grandmother's biography?
Oh, that's a great one. I was hoping you would ask that one. It's on Amazon. So if you go to just Amazon.com, if you look by my name or if you look by the title, it's called Humanity in Auschwitz, Letters from My Grandmother by Lauren Meyerowitz Port. You can find it right there on Amazon.com. It's available in paperback and Kindle. And if you don't have a Kindle, you can download a Kindle app to your phone, and then it's an ebook format that you can see on your phone.
Great, thank you. And I'll have you, or I'll type that out, or I'll have you type that out, and we can share it with all that RSVP'd with their email, via their email, and then we can post it on Facebook as well. So the link will be out there for everyone that's interested. We have a good question coming in through Zoom. You did a great job, Lauren, really giving definitions in your presentation, but someone wants to know if you can go into a little more of defining what we mean by 2G and 3G.
Oh, sure. The descendants are the first generation, quote unquote, so the survivors are the one who experienced the Holocaust. Their children are the 2Gs, and their grandchildren are the 3Gs, or second and third generation.
Thank you. Okay, does anyone else have any questions? Thank you for the questions that we've received on Zoom and Facebook Live. And of course, you're getting a lot of praise and support in the comments section. I know you can't see those, but just know that they're there, and I'll send them to you as well. Lauren, before we go,
everybody.
Oh, yes. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
No, I think that's it. I hope that you learned something from today's presentation and really take Ruth's message forward with you.
We did get one more question, if that's okay.
Of course.
How can you say more about how the events of the Holocaust continue to impact 3G?
I think 3Gs in general know a lot about the Holocaust from their grandparents, sometimes even more so than the children of the survivors. And so from the people I've met in 3G groups and when everybody gets together and has presentations, well, perhaps it's the people who are most impacted who come to these events, but I think everybody feels that there's something to be learned from the Holocaust, and there's this great importance we feel for preserving the stories. And so a lot of the 3Gs maybe know the stories very well, and or even if they don't know some of it, enough to know how important it is that we're the last link to knowing the survivors.
Thank you. Okay. Well, Lauren, thank you so much again for being here this evening and for giving this virtual presentation. I know we had originally planned for you to be in person, but we appreciate you coming on to this adaptive form. And I want to thank you on behalf of the HRC M3GNJ for preserving not only your grandmother's memory, but your family history, and of course, not only remembering, but actively sharing. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This conversation was recorded, so if you're okay with it, Lauren, if anyone that's interested in watching it later can view the MP4, or you can look on Facebook. It'll be at facebook.com/Kean, KEAN, UN, HRC. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Lauren, thank you again. We hope to see you soon, and good night, everyone.
Thank you.